Kim Dae-jung didn't become the head of the most powerful Korean organized crime syndicate in the Southeast by making mistakes. At 34, he commanded an empire built on precision, loyalty, and an iron will that could bend circumstances to his favor. They called him the Tumak, the boss, and when he spoke, men with twice his years and 3 times his scars listened without question. His organization, the Chilsungpa, had roots that stretched back to Busan, connections that spanned from Seoul to Los Angeles, and operations that moved through Atlanta like blood through veins, invisible but essential. They controlled everything from real estate to entertainment, from legitimate businesses that gleamed in the sun to shadow operations that thrived in darkness. And Dae-jung controlled it all with the calm efficiency of a surgeon wielding a scalpel. He sat now in his office on the top floor of a building he owned in Buckhead, the wealthy heart of Atlanta. The office was minimalist, almost austere. Dark wood, clean lines, and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the glittering city below. A single piece of Korean calligraphy hung on the wall behind his desk. Black ink on white paper. Invincible under heaven. His father had given it to him before he died, back when Dae-jung was just a soldier in this endless war. But tonight, his legendary focus was fractured. His jaw was tight, his hands clenched on the armrests of his leather chair. In front of him stood his underboss, Lee Miho, a man built like a tank and just as subtle. "She's planning to testify," Miho said, his voice flat. "The prosecutor has her secured in a safe house. If she talks Yeongnim, the Gwangju connection unravels. Everything we've built over there, gone. And the Vietnamese will move in before we can blink." Dae-jung's expression didn't change, but his fingers drummed once against the armrest. The only sign of his displeasure. The woman in question, Sarah Chen, was a bookkeeper who had worked for one of their front companies. Greedy, sloppy, she'd been skimming. And when they'd confronted her, she'd run straight to the FBI. Now she was singing like a canary about wire transfers, offshore accounts, and meetings she'd witnessed. She had to be silenced, but not killed. That would only confirm everything she'd said and bring down more heat than they could afford. No, she needed to disappear, quietly and completely, somewhere she'd never be found. Somewhere even the FBI couldn't reach. They had a place for that. A container ship leaving Savannah in 3 days, bound for Southeast Asia. She'd vanish into the machinery of their global network, and by the time anyone realized she was gone, the trail would be ice cold. "Address?" Dae-jung asked. Miho slid a piece of paper across the desk. 3247 Oakmont Drive, Unit B, Residential Complex in Decatur. FBI thinks they're clever, hiding her in a middle-class neighborhood instead of a hotel. She's scheduled to give her deposition in 5 days. We move tonight. Dae-jung picked up the paper, memorizing the address, then fed it into the shredder beside his desk, the machine word, consuming the evidence. "Who are you sending?" "Choyan Park, clean extraction." She goes in the van, straight to the warehouse, then to the port. Miho hesitated. "You want to oversee this yourself?" "No," Dae-jung said, standing. He moved to the window, hands clasped behind his back. The city sprawled before him, a constellation of lights and lives, each one a potential piece on his chessboard. "But I want confirmation the moment it's done. No mistakes, Miho. This one has to be perfect." His underboss nodded and left, his footsteps silent on the plush carpet. The door clicked shut, and Dae-jung was alone with the city and his thoughts. He didn't know it yet, but in that moment, as he stared out at Atlanta's glittering skyline, perfect was about to become impossible. Zara Thompson was 28 years old and had exactly 3 goals in life: pay off her nursing school loans, save enough for a down payment on a real house instead of her cramped apartment, and maybe, finally say yes when Marcus from the ER asked her out for the 100th time. She was practical, grounded, and had a laugh that could light up the darkest hospital corridor at 3 in the morning. She was also, at this precise moment, humming along to Beyoncé as she walked down Oakmont Drive. Her mind blissfully empty of everything except the anticipation of peeling off her scrubs and taking the world's longest shower. 3247 Oakmont Drive was her building. Unit A, second floor, with the temperamental air conditioning and the neighbor who played saxophone at ungodly hours. She'd lived there for 2 years, ever since finishing nursing school, and knew every crack in the sidewalk, every rusty gate, every flickering streetlight. What she didn't know was that Unit B, the unit directly below hers, had been rented 3 days ago by the U.S. Marshal Service as a safe house for a federal witness. What she didn't know was that a black van with tinted windows had been circling the block for the past 20 minutes, waiting for the right moment. What she didn't know was that from a distance, in the dark, with her hair pulled back in a bun and her slim build, she looked remarkably like Sarah Chen. And what she really didn't know was that Kim Dae-jung's people, for all their legendary efficiency, had made a critical error. The intelligence they'd received had been good, the address, the timing, the description of the target. But no one had bothered to confirm the apartment number. No one had considered that in a building with A and B units, the number alone wasn't enough. Zara reached her building and was fishing for her keys when she heard the van door slide open behind her. She turned, mildly curious, thinking maybe it was a delivery. That was her last clear thought before the world exploded into chaos. Two men in dark clothes moved with the practiced efficiency of predators. Before she could scream, before she could even process what was happening, a hand clamped over her mouth, firm but not cruel, muffling her shout to a muted sound that died in the humid night air. An arm wrapped around her waist, lifting her clean off her feet with shocking ease. She kicked, writhed, tried to bite the hand, but they were professionals and she was just a surprised woman at the end of a long shift. Quiet, a voice hissed in her ear, accented, urgent. Don't fight. No one needs to get hurt. Her bag hit the sidewalk, contents spilling. Her keys, her phone, her life scattered across concrete. Then she was in the van, the door slamming shut, darkness swallowing her whole. Something soft but firm pressed over her face. Not smothering, just muffling. The chemical smell told her it was chloroform even as her training tried to kick in, even as her thoughts began to swim and blur. The last thing she registered before unconsciousness claimed her was a voice speaking rapid Korean, and the feeling of movement as the van pulled away from the curb, carrying her into a nightmare she couldn't have imagined in her most anxious dreams. Dae-jung's phone buzzed at 2:47 a.m. He'd been awake, of course. Sleep was a luxury he could rarely afford, and tonight his mind had been turning over contingencies, backup plans, potential complications. He answered on the second ring. It's done. Minho's voice came through, steady and professional. Clean extraction, no witnesses. She's at the warehouse now. Choi says she's still sedated but stable. We'll move her to the port in the morning, once we have the container prepped. Relief should have flooded through him. Instead, Dae-jung felt only the familiar weight of necessary action. Any complications? None. It went exactly as planned. Good. Keep her comfortable but secured. I don't want her hurt, just unavailable. Understood, Hyungnim. He hung up and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. One problem solved. Sarah Chen would disappear, the FBI would scramble, and by the time they realized their star witness was gone, the Chil Sung-pa would have already sealed the gaps she'd threatened to expose. Clean, efficient, perfect. Except it wasn't. At 3:15 a.m., his phone rang again. This time, it was a different number. Choi, the man who'd led the extraction team. That was unusual. If Minho had assigned Choi to the job, Choi should report only to Minho. A direct call to Dae-jung meant something had gone wrong. He answered, What is it? Hyungnim, we have a problem. Choi's voice was tight with barely controlled panic, and Dae-jung's blood went cold. Choi had been in the game for 15 years. The man didn't panic. Explain. The woman, we grabbed her from the address Minho gave us, 3247 Oakmont Drive, just like he said. But Hyungnim, Choi's voice dropped even lower. This isn't Sarah Chen. Dae-jung was on his feet before he consciously decided to move. What do you mean it's not Sarah Chen? You had photographs. You had a description. I know. In the dark, from behind, she looked right. Same height, same build, hair pulled back the same way. But Hyungnim, when we got her here and got a good look, Choi's breathing was ragged now. This is a different woman, African-American, late 20s. She had a hospital ID badge in her bag. She's a nurse, Hyungnim. Zara Thompson. She lives in the building, but the wrong unit. We grabbed the wrong woman. The words hit Dae-jung like physical blows. For a long moment, he couldn't speak, couldn't think past the roaring in his ears. In 20 years of operation, from his days as a young soldier in Busan to his rise to Tumuk in Atlanta, he had never made a mistake like this. How, he said, each word carved from ice. Did this happen? The building has A and B units. Chen is in Unit B, ground floor. This woman, Thompson, she's in Unit A, second floor. Same address, different apartment. Minho's intelligence didn't specify which unit, and in the dark, we just saw a woman matching the general description entering the building at the address we were given. We thought, Choi's voice cracked, we thought she was the target. Daejung's mind raced through the implications with the speed of falling dominoes. They had kidnapped a civilian, an innocent woman with no connection to their world, no knowledge of their operations, a nurse with a job, a life, people who would notice her absence. This wasn't just a complication, this was a disaster. "Where's Minho?" he demanded. "Already on his way to you. Hyungnim, what do you want us to do? We can't just let her go. She saw our faces, heard us speaking Korean. Even if we dumped her somewhere remote, she'd go straight to the police. We'd have every cop in Atlanta looking for 2 Korean men and a black van. The heat would be—" "I know what the heat would be," Daejung cut him off. His mind was already working through options, none of them good. "Don't do anything. Don't speak to her. Don't let her see more than she already has. Is she hurt?" "No. Shaken, terrified, but physically fine. We gave her minimal sedation, just enough to keep her calm during transport. She's awake now, but restrained. Hyungnim, she keeps asking why this is happening, who we are. She's crying." I said, "Don't speak to her." Daejung pinched the bridge of his nose, feeling the beginning of a headache building behind his eyes. "I'm coming there. Don't move her. Don't touch her. And Choi, this conversation never happened. If anyone asks, you followed orders perfectly, and the mistake was in the intelligence, not the execution." "Yes, Hyungnim, thank you." He hung up and stood in the darkness of his office, the city lights below offering no answers. Minho would be there any minute, and they would need a plan. But for the first time in his career as Tumok, Kim Dae-jung had no idea what that plan should be. They couldn't kill her. She was an innocent, and he had rules, lines he would not cross. They couldn't let her go. She was a witness now, a threat to everything he'd built. And they couldn't simply make her disappear like they'd planned for Chen. This woman had a life, a job, people who cared about her. Her absence would be noticed, investigated. He had spent years building an empire on the foundation of never making mistakes. And now, because of one incorrect unit number, because of the coincidence of a tired nurse coming home at the wrong moment, his perfect record was shattered. The wrong woman was locked in his warehouse, terrified and confused. And Kim Dae-jung, the invincible Tumok of the Chilsungpa, had no idea what to do about it. Zara woke to industrial lighting and the smell of concrete. Her head throbbed. Her mouth was dry, and for a disorienting moment she thought she'd somehow ended up back at the hospital. Maybe in some basement storage area she'd never seen before. Then memory crashed back. The van, the hands, the chemical smell, the darkness. And panic flooded her system like ice water in her veins. She tried to move and couldn't. Her wrists were secured to the arms of a metal chair, not painfully tight, but absolutely immovable. Her ankles were similarly bound to the chair legs. The chair itself was bolted to the floor. She was in what looked like a large, empty warehouse, the kind of space that might once have held shipping containers or industrial equipment. Now it held only her, the chair, and an overwhelming sense of dread. "Hello?" Her voice came out hoarse, cracking. "Hello? Someone help me, please." No answer, just the echo of her own desperation bouncing off concrete walls. She fought against the restraints, usefulness giving way to raw terror. This couldn't be happening. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. She was a nurse. She had car insurance and a retirement plan and a coffee maker that broke every 6 months. She was boring, safe, normal. "Please," she called again, tears streaming down her face now. "Please, there's been a mistake. I don't know who you think I am, but I'm just a nurse. My name is Zara Thompson. I work at Grady Memorial. You can call them. You can check. Please just let me go and I won't say anything to anyone. I promise, I swear." The sound of a heavy door opening cut off her pleas. She jerked her head toward the sound. Hope and terror warring in her chest. 2 men entered. Asian, well-dressed in dark clothes, moving with the controlled grace of people who knew how to use violence. One was massive, built like a linebacker. The other was leaner but somehow more dangerous, all sharp angles and predatory focus. And behind them came a third man. He was different from the others. Younger than she'd expected, maybe mid-30s, dressed in an immaculate charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. His face was striking. High cheekbones, sharp jawline, dark eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He moved with the unconscious authority of someone who never had to raise his voice to command a room. He stopped 3 paces away from her chair, studying her with an intensity that made her feel like a specimen under a microscope. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and controlled, with a faint Korean accent that marked certain syllables. "You're not Sarah Chen." It wasn't a question, but Zara answered anyway, her words tumbling over each other in desperate urgency. No, I'm not. I don't know who that is. My name is Zara Thompson. I'm a nurse at Grady Memorial. I live at 3247 Oakmont Drive, Unit A. I was just coming home from work, from a night shift, and your men grabbed me. There's been a mistake. A terrible mistake. Please, I have a family. I have a mother who... Quiet. The single word cut through her panic like a knife. Not shouted, not even particularly harsh, but carrying such absolute authority that she found herself obeying before she consciously decided to. She fell silent, chest heaving, staring up at him with wide, terrified eyes. He turned to the larger man. "Miho, explain to me how this happened." The big man, Miho, straightened slightly, though he didn't quite meet his boss's eyes. "The intelligence was good, Hyungnim, 3247 Oakmont Drive. We confirmed the witness was moved there 3 days ago, but the building has multiple units. Sarah Chen is in Unit B, ground floor. Ms. Thompson lives in Unit A, second floor, in the dark, from a distance, similar build, similar silhouette. You didn't confirm the unit number." Still that same controlled tone, but now there was something deadly underneath it, like ice over deep water. "No, Hyungnim. And you didn't verify her identity before the extraction." "We thought..." "You didn't think. You acted on assumption." The boss, Hyungnim they'd called him, finally looked away from Zara, fixing Miho with a gaze that could have cut steel. "Because of your sloppy intelligence, we now have an innocent civilian in our custody. A nurse. Someone whose absence will be noticed, whose disappearance will be investigated. You've created a problem that could bring down everything we've built." The room had gone cold. The leaner man beside Miho had taken a step back, as if putting distance between himself and the coming storm. Miho himself had gone pale, his jaw working. "Hyungnim, Get out. Both of you, wait outside. I need to think." They left without argument, the door closing behind them with a hollow boom that echoed through the warehouse. And then Zara was alone with the man who held her life in his hands. He returned his attention to her, and for a long moment, they simply looked at each other. She saw him seeing her, really seeing her for the first time. Not Sarah Chen, not a target or a problem to be solved, but a person. A woman with terror in her eyes and tears on her cheeks, bound to a chair in a cold warehouse at 4 a.m. "Please," she whispered, because what else could she say? "Please don't kill me." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or discomfort. He pulled over a plastic crate, the kind used for shipping, and sat down on it, bringing himself closer to her eye level. The gesture was almost considerate, like a doctor pulling up a stool to speak with a patient. "I'm not going to kill you," he said quietly. "That was never the intention, even with the woman we meant to take. We don't kill innocents. It's against our code." "Your code," she repeated, almost laughing, except nothing about this was funny. "You kidnap people, but you have a code?" "Yes." He said it simply, without apparent irony. "My name is Kim Dae-jung. You're in a warehouse owned by my organization. You were taken by mistake. A mistake that should never have happened, and for which I apologize." The absurdity of it, a criminal apologizing for kidnapping the wrong person, might have been darkly funny in any other circumstance. But Zara was too terrified to appreciate the irony. "Then let me go, please. If it was a mistake, just let me go and I won't tell anyone. I promise. I'll say I don't remember anything, that I was mugged or I got drunk or whatever you want me to say. Just please. It's not that simple." He ran a hand through his hair, the first gesture she'd seen from him that seemed anything less than perfectly controlled. "You've seen my face. You've heard our names. You know we're Korean, that we're organized. You're a smart woman. A nurse, you said. You've probably already memorized details you don't even realize you noticed. If we let you go, you'd go to the police. You'd give descriptions, and we would be hunted." "I wouldn't," she insisted desperately. "I swear to God I wouldn't. I just want to go home. I just want my life back." "You say that now, in this moment, because you're afraid and you'll say anything to survive. That's human nature." But later, when you're safe and the fear fades, you'd remember that you were a victim of a crime. You'd want justice. You'd talk. He shook his head slowly. No, I believe you mean what you say right now, but I can't risk my people, my organization, on the hope that you'll keep your word when every instinct you have will tell you to seek help. Zara felt hope crumbling. So what then? What are you going to do with me? I don't know yet. And he sounded, for the first time, uncertain. Almost human. This has never happened before. In 20 years, we've never taken an innocent person. I need to think, to plan. I have a mother, Zara said, the words breaking. And a younger brother. My mom, she's not well. She has diabetes and high blood pressure, and I'm the one who manages her medications, who takes her to her appointments. If I disappear, if something happens to me... Tears were flowing freely now. Please, please don't take me away from my family. He stood abruptly, and for a moment she thought she'd gotten through to him, but his face had gone closed again, unreadable. I'll have food and water brought to you, and a bathroom will be arranged. You won't be harmed. But you will remain here until I decide what to do. How long? Her voice was barely a whisper. He didn't answer. He simply walked away, his footsteps echoing across the concrete, leaving her alone once more in the cold and the silence and the growing certainty that her life, as she'd known it, was over. Dae-jung didn't go back to his office. He went to his home, a sleek, modern house in Brookhaven that most people assumed belonged to a successful businessman, which wasn't entirely a lie. He dismissed his bodyguards, poured himself 2 fingers of expensive whiskey he almost never drank, and sat in the dark of his living room, staring at nothing. Zara Thompson, 28 years old. Registered nurse, no criminal record, not even a speeding ticket. Her mother, Loretta Thompson, lived in College Park. Her brother, Marcus Thompson, was a junior at Georgia State. She had a small but close circle of friends, was active in her church, and according to her social media, which Miho had pulled up within an hour of discovering the mistake, she loved terrible reality TV, had a standing Sunday brunch tradition, and posted pictures of her nephews with captions that always included about 20 heart emojis. She was, in every sense of the word, an innocent. The exact type of person his father had taught him to protect, not terrorize. The type of person the Chil Sung-pa had always carefully avoided entangling in their operations. And now she was locked in his warehouse, bound to a chair, crying for her mother. He drained the whiskey and poured another. The practical options were limited and all bad. He could kill her, quick, painless, and her body would never be found. The Chil Sung-pa had methods, connections. Within 24 hours, she could be nothing more than a missing person case that would eventually go cold. It was the safest option for the organization. But Dae-jung had rules, lines he would not cross, even for survival. He'd killed men before, plenty of them. Rivals, traitors, men who'd broken their oaths or threatened his people, but never an innocent. Never someone who'd done nothing beyond being in the wrong place at the wrong time. That line was one of the few things that separated him from animals like the Russian mob, the cartels, the truly lawless organizations that left bodies and terror in their wake. If he crossed that line, he would become the monster his enemies already claimed he was. And more than that, he would betray everything his father had tried to teach him about power tempered with honor, strength with restraint. But the alternative wasn't much better. He could keep her imprisoned indefinitely, but that was its own kind of torture. Days would turn to weeks, weeks to months. She would never see her family again, would never return to her life. She would exist in limbo, neither dead nor free, living in whatever safe house they set up for her until... what? Until she went mad from isolation? Until she stopped being a person and became just a problem, a liability to be managed? He couldn't do that to her, wouldn't. The third option, letting her go with some kind of assurance that she'd keep quiet, was suicide. She might mean every promise now, but the moment she was free, survival instinct would kick in. She'd go to the police. She'd give descriptions. The FBI was already investigating their operations. This would give them exactly the opening they needed. Dae-jung would have to dismantle years of careful construction, burn bridges, eliminate assets. People would die. The organization would fracture, all because of one wrong address. He was still sitting in the dark, the whiskey forgotten, when his phone buzzed with a text from Miho. She's asking for you, says she needs to speak with you. Dae-jung stared at the message for a long moment, Then he stood, straightened his tie, and headed back to the warehouse. Because whatever else he was, criminal, Tumok, man of violence, he was not a coward. And if Zara Thompson had something to say to the man holding her prisoner, the least he could do was listen. When he returned to the warehouse, it was nearly dawn. The sky outside was turning from black to deep blue. And somewhere in the distance, birds were beginning their morning chorus, oblivious to the human drama unfolding in the industrial space. Zara Thompson looked exhausted. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, and there was a hollow look to her face that spoke of terror that had burned through all its fuel and left only ash behind. Someone, probably Choi, had brought her water and what looked like an untouched sandwich on a paper plate. She looked up when he entered, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. "You wanted to talk to me?" he said finally, stopping in the same spot he'd stood before, that careful distance that kept him removed from her immediate space. "Yes." Her voice was hoarse but steadier than before. "I've been thinking about what you said, about why you can't let me go." "And?" She took a shaky breath. "You're right. If you let me go right now, I would go to the police. Not because I want revenge or justice or any of that, but because I'm a nurse and I've been trained to report crimes. It's literally part of my job. So, yes, you're right. I would talk." He nodded slowly. At least she was being honest. "But," she continued, "that doesn't mean this is unsolvable. You're obviously an intelligent man, a businessman, even if your business isn't legal. You think strategically. So let's think strategically about this." Despite himself, Dae-jung felt a flicker of interest. "I'm listening. You have 3 basic options, right? Kill me, keep me prisoner forever, or let me go. You've already ruled out killing me. Thank you for that, by the way. And keeping me locked up forever isn't sustainable. So we're left with letting me go, which you won't do because you think I'll talk." She paused, swallowing hard. "What if I had a reason not to talk? A reason strong enough that you'd believe it?" "What kind of reason?" "I don't know yet, but there has to be something. Some kind of arrangement we could make that would give you security and give me my life back. I just..." Her voice cracked slightly, but she pushed through. "I just need you to see me as a person, not just a problem. Because I am a person. I have a life, people I love, dreams, stupid as that sounds right now. And I'm begging you, actually, literally begging you, to help me figure out how we can both get what we need from this nightmare." He studied her for a long moment. There was something remarkable about her composure, given the circumstances. She was terrified. That much was obvious from her trembling hands and the sheen of perspiration on her forehead. But she was thinking, trying to survive not through tears and pleas, though those had their place, but through logic and negotiation. He respected that. "What do you do?" he asked abruptly. "At the hospital. What kind of nurse?" The question clearly caught her off guard. Emergency department. Trauma cases mostly. Gunshots, car accidents, heart attacks. Whatever comes through the door. "Do you like it?" What kind of question is that? A simple one. "Do you like your work?" She blinked, confusion mixing with lingering fear. "Yes, I love it. It's hard, it's heartbreaking sometimes, but it matters. I save lives, I make a difference. Not always, but sometimes, and those times make all the rest worth it." He nodded slowly, something beginning to take shape in his mind. An idea. Probably a terrible one, but all his options were terrible now. So what was one more? "You want to see your family again? Return to your life. More than anything. And you understand that for me to allow that, I need absolute certainty that you won't expose my organization. That you won't speak to the police, the FBI, your friends, anyone." "Yes." "Then perhaps," he said slowly, "there is a way. Not one you'll like. Not one I like either, honestly. But possibly the only way that protects us both." Hope flared in her eyes, desperate and bright. "Tell me, whatever it is, I'll do it. Don't agree until you've heard it." He moved closer, finally sitting on that same plastic crate, bringing them to eye level again. "The only way I can be certain of your silence is if you're not just afraid of what I might do to you if you talk. Fear is a good motivator, but it fades. People convince themselves they can outsmart what they're afraid of, or they reach a point where they decide some things are worth the risk. No, for this to work, I need you to have something to protect. Something you value more than justice or freedom from fear." "I don't understand." "You would stay here, not as a prisoner, but as..." He hesitated, the words tasting strange on his tongue. As someone under my protection, you would see your family regularly, under controlled circumstances. You would maintain your job, your routines. To the outside world, nothing would have changed, but you would be connected to me, to my organization, so interwoven in our operations that speaking against us would harm you as much as it harmed me. She stared at him, processing. You want me to work for you? Not exactly. I want you to become part of my world. Not by choice, I understand, but in a way that makes it impossible for you to betray us without destroying yourself in the process. How would that even work? What are you talking about? He ran a hand through his hair again, that gesture of frustration. I haven't figured out all the details yet, but the concept is simple. You need motivation to stay silent that goes beyond fear. So we create that motivation. We bind your life to ours in a way that makes betrayal unthinkable. Zara shook her head, tears starting again. This is insane. You're insane. You can't just... I don't even know what you're suggesting. Keep me as some kind of hostage who goes to work every day? Make me pretend everything's normal while I'm really your prisoner? How is that different from keeping me locked in this warehouse forever? Because you'd be free, he said quietly. Within certain parameters, yes, but free. You'd see your mother, your brother, your friends. You'd go to work, save lives, live your life. The only difference is that a part of that life would always belong to me. To my organization. It's not ideal, but it's survival for both of us. She was crying openly now, but silently, her shoulders shaking. I want to go home. I just want to go home. I know. And he meant it. Despite himself, despite everything, he felt something twist in his chest at her tears. But that's not possible. Not the way things were. We can't undo this. We can only move forward and try to find a path that doesn't destroy us both. He stood preparing to leave her with that impossible choice when she spoke again. How do I know you'll keep your word? How do I know that the moment I agree to this, whatever this even is, that you won't just kill me anyway? He turned back to face her, meeting her eyes directly. Because I am many things, Ms. Thompson. A criminal, a man of violence. But I am not a liar. When I give my word, I keep it. That's what separates men from animals in my world. Honor, reputation, trust. They're all we have. That's not very reassuring coming from a kidnapper. No, he agreed. I suppose it isn't, but it's all I can offer you. My word that if you agree to this arrangement, I will ensure you're protected, that your family is protected, that your life continues. Different, but continuing. It's that or... He let the sentence hang, unfinished. She closed her eyes, fresh tears leaking from beneath her lids. When she opened them again, she looked directly at him, and he saw something in her gaze that he hadn't expected. Not just fear and desperation, but a spark of defiance. A refusal to simply break, even in the face of impossible odds. I need time to think about it. You have until tomorrow evening. After that, I need an answer. Because every hour you remain here, every hour you're missing, is another hour that people notice and start asking questions. We need a solution, Ms. Thompson, and we need it soon. He left her there in the growing light of dawn, and as he walked back to his car, Kim Dae-jung found himself hoping, for both their sakes, that she would agree. Because the alternative was becoming increasingly unthinkable, and somewhere in the back of his mind, a dangerous thought was taking root. What if this wrong turn, this terrible mistake, was somehow the beginning of something he couldn't yet see? Something that might change both their lives in ways neither of them could predict? He pushed the thought away and drove home to plan for contingencies, to prepare for tomorrow, to do what he'd always done, control the situation, manage the risk, survive. But the thought remained, quiet but persistent, like a seed waiting for the right conditions to grow. 26 hours after she was taken, Zara Thompson gave her answer. Dae-jung returned to the warehouse to find her sitting upright in the chair, no longer crying, her face set in lines of exhausted determination. I'll do it, she said before he could even speak. Whatever arrangement you're proposing, I'll do it. I want to live. I want to see my family. I'll agree to your terms. You understand what you're agreeing to? He asked carefully. A connection to a criminal organization. A life where your freedom is conditional, where you'll always be watched, always be accountable to people you never chose to be accountable to. Do I have a choice? There's always a choice. Death is a choice. Permanent imprisonment is a choice. Then those aren't real choices, are they? She met his gaze without flinching. So yes, I understand, and I still agree. Now, can you please untie me? My hands are going numb. He nodded to Choi, who had been standing guard near the door. The man approached with a knife and carefully cut the restraints. Zara rubbed her wrists, wincing, red marks visible where the bonds had been. Thank you, she said quietly. Daejung pulled up a folding chair. They'd brought in a few basic pieces of furniture while she'd been deciding, and sat across from her. We need to establish some ground rules. First, you'll return home today. To everyone who knows you, you were mugged. Grabbed off the street, thrown in a van, robbed of your wallet and phone, then dumped in a park. You were disoriented, you wandered for a while, finally found your way home. You'll file a police report, but you won't remember any useful details about your attackers. Understood? Won't people think that's suspicious? That I was gone a whole day and barely remember? Mild concussion. You were roughed up a bit, hit your head. The hospital will confirm it. We have people there who can make sure the paperwork matches your story. Your job will be understanding. You'll take a few days off, then return to work as normal. She nodded slowly, absorbing the details of the lie she'd have to live. Second, he continued, you'll have a phone. A special one, not your regular phone. This phone will have one number in it, mine. If you need anything, if you're in danger, if something goes wrong, you call that number. I will answer, always, day or night. Why would I need that? Because you're under my protection now. That means if anyone threatens you, harms you, even looks at you wrong, they're threatening me. And I don't tolerate threats. You're safer now than you've ever been in your life, whether you realize it or not. The irony of the man who'd kidnapped her promising protection wasn't lost on either of them, but she didn't comment on it. Third, and this is important, you will be assigned a guardian, someone from my organization who will watch over you. Not obviously, not intrusively, but they'll be there, following you to work, keeping an eye on your apartment, making sure you're safe, and... He paused. Making sure you keep to our agreement. A babysitter, you mean, or a jailer? Call it what you want, but they're necessary, for both our sakes. She was quiet for a moment, digesting all of this. Then she asked the question he'd been expecting. And what do I have to do for you? You said I'd be connected to your organization, that I'd be part of your world. What does that actually mean? This was the part he'd struggled with. Because honestly, he didn't have a clear answer. She wasn't a criminal. She had no skills that would be useful to his operations, or at least none he wanted to corrupt by involving her in illegal activities. She was a nurse, a healer. Everything in his world revolved around violence and profit. The two didn't naturally intersect. For now, he said carefully, it means staying silent, maintaining the story we've created, living your life under the protection and observation of my people. As time goes on, there may be situations where your skills could be useful, medical situations that require discretion, but nothing illegal, nothing that violates your ethics as a nurse. I won't ask you to do anything that would cost you your license or your integrity. How generous, she said flatly. I know this isn't what you want. I know you hate me, hate everything about this, but Ms. Thompson... Zara. What? If we're going to have this weird, coerced relationship, if you're going to control my life, at least call me by my first name. He nodded slowly. Zara, what I'm trying to say is that I will keep my word. You'll be protected. Your family will be protected. And within the constraints we've discussed, you'll have your life back. I know that's not enough. I know you'll probably never forgive me for this, but it's the best I can offer. She stood swaying slightly. She'd been bound to that chair for more than a day, with only short bathroom breaks. And he instinctively reached out to steady her. She jerked away from his touch, and he let his hand drop. One more thing, she said, her voice hard. You said I'm under your protection now. That means my family too, right? If I keep your secrets, if I play along with this nightmare you've created, you promise me that nothing will happen to my mother or my brother. You have my word? Your word as what? A criminal? A kidnapper? My word as Tumok, as the head of an organization built on honor and loyalty. Break your word to me, Zara, and yes, there will be consequences. But keep it, and you'll find that my protection is absolute. No one, not rival gangs, not corrupt cops, not anyone, will touch your family. On that you have my oath. She studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether he was lying. Whatever she saw there must have been convincing because she finally nodded. Then take me home. I need to see my mother. I need her to know I'm alive. And then we can start this horrible new life you've designed for me. He drove her himself, in his personal car rather than one of the organization's vehicles. It felt important somehow, this gesture, showing her that she wasn't just cargo, just a problem to be managed. The drive was silent except for the low hum of the radio and the city waking up around them. When they pulled up outside her apartment building, 3247 Oakmont Drive, Unit A, the address that had started all of this, she paused with her hand on the door handle. I'm going to hate you for this, she said quietly, not looking at him. Probably forever. You know that, right? Yes. Good, as long as we're clear. She got out of the car and walked toward her building without looking back. Dae-jung watched her go, watched her climb those familiar stairs to her front door, watched her disappear into her apartment. Then he pulled out his phone and called Miho. She's home. Assign someone to watch her. Someone good, someone subtle. And have the doctor ready for when she goes to the hospital for her concussion. Everything needs to be perfect. Yes, Youngnim, and the Chen situation is still a problem, but a secondary one now. We'll deal with it. First, I need to make sure our new arrangement holds. If Zara Thompson keeps her word, we might survive this mistake. If she doesn't, he let the sentence hang. Understood. I'll handle it. Dae-jung ended the call and sat in his car, staring up at the window that was now lit from within. Zara, probably calling her mother, probably crying with relief and residual terror. He'd given her her life back. A constrained, monitored, conditional life, but a life nonetheless. And in doing so, he'd bound her to him in a way that was going to complicate everything. Because keeping an unwilling, traumatized nurse connected to a criminal organization was going to require constant management, constant attention. She would hate him. She would resist. And he would have to remain in her life. A constant reminder of the worst days she'd ever experienced. Part of him wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake, if he should have chosen one of the other options, cleaner and more final. But another part, a part he didn't want to examine too closely, was thinking about her eyes, her voice, the way she'd refused to simply break, even when breaking would have been so much easier. There was something admirable about her strength, something that spoke to a part of him he'd thought was dead. He drove away before he could complete that thought, before it could take root and grow into something he couldn't control, because Kim Dae-jung controlled everything in his life. His organization, his operations, his emotions. But as the weeks ahead would prove, Zara Thompson was about to become the one thing he could never quite control, no matter how hard he tried. And that was going to change everything. The first 2 weeks of their arrangement were, in a word, miserable. Zara filed her police report as instructed, playing the part of the traumatized mugging victim. The detective who took her statement was sympathetic, but not particularly hopeful. These kinds of random crimes rarely got solved, he told her gently. Her description of her attackers was vague to the point of uselessness. And without her wallet or phone recovered, there was little to go on. The case would be investigated, but she shouldn't hold her breath. She nodded, thanked him, and felt sick with the lie. Her mother descended on her apartment within hours of her return, crying and hugging her, and making her promise to move to a safer neighborhood, a better building, somewhere with actual security. Zara held her and lied through her teeth. Yes, she'd be more careful. Yes, she'd look into moving. No, she wasn't traumatized, just shaken up. Her brother called from campus, his voice tight with worry and barely suppressed anger. If he ever found the men who'd done this, he told her, he'd make them pay. She told him to focus on his studies and to never, ever try to play vigilante. And through it all, she was aware of being watched. His name was Park Jin-woo, and he was her assigned guardian. She spotted him the first time 2 days after she returned home. A young Korean man in casual clothes, sitting in a car across from her apartment building, looking for all the world like he was waiting for someone. But he was there the next morning too. And the next. Always at a discreet distance, always careful not to be obvious, but always, always there. He followed her to work, waited outside the hospital during her shifts, followed her to the grocery store, to her mother's house, to church. He never approached her, never spoke to her, just existed in her peripheral vision, a constant reminder that her life was no longer entirely her own. It made her want to scream. She tried to go about her routine, to pretend everything was normal. But normal had become a foreign country, and she was just a tourist pretending to speak the language. At work, she threw herself into her patients with almost manic focus. Because when she was dealing with a gunshot victim or a cardiac arrest, she couldn't think about anything else. The ER was the only place where her new reality faded, replaced by the familiar chaos of saving lives. Her coworkers noticed the change in her, of course. She was quieter, more intense. She volunteered for extra shifts. She didn't laugh as much at the break room jokes. When they asked if she was okay, if the mugging had affected her more than she was letting on, she smiled tightly and changed the subject. And every night when she got home to her apartment, her once safe, once comfortable apartment that now felt like a cage, she looked at the special phone Dae-jung had given her. It sat on her nightstand, sleek and black and ominous. She hadn't called him. She hadn't needed to. But its presence was a constant reminder of the invisible chains that bound her. She hated him. God, how she hated him. Some nights she fantasized about calling the police, about telling them everything, about watching his empire burn. But then she'd think about the promise he'd made. The threat, really. And she'd remember that her mother and brother were only safe as long as she kept quiet. So she stayed silent, and she hated him more for making her complicit in her own imprisonment. For Dae-jung's part, the arrangement was proving more complicated than he'd anticipated. He received daily reports from Park about Zara's movements, her behavior, her emotional state. She was going to work, coming home, visiting her family. Everything normal, everything according to plan. But he found himself concerned. Not about whether she'd keep her word. Park would report any suspicious contact with police or FBI immediately. No, he was concerned about her. About the way Park described her obvious distress, her isolation, the way she seemed to be functioning on autopilot rather than truly living. He told himself it was practical concern. A traumatized woman was more likely to make mistakes, to break under pressure. He needed her stable, functional, compliant. That was all. But late at night, in his office, he'd find himself thinking about her face in the warehouse, the tears, the plea in her voice. And something in him would twist uncomfortably. He'd created this situation. He'd turned an innocent woman's life into a waking nightmare because of a mistake his organization had made. And no matter how necessary his decision had been, no matter how much he'd been protecting his people, he couldn't escape the truth. He'd done this to her. It bothered him more than it should have. 3 weeks into the arrangement, his phone rang at 11 p.m. Not his regular phone, the special one, the number he'd given Zara. He stared at it for a moment, surprised, then answered. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately. "Are you in danger?" "No." Her voice was tight, controlled. "I need to see you, tonight. We need to talk." "Talk about what?" "About how this arrangement isn't working, about how I can't keep living like this, about how we need to figure out something different before I lose my mind." He heard the desperation underneath the anger, the fraying edges of her composure. "Where are you?" "Home, and your stalker is in his usual spot across the street, so don't pretend you don't know." "I'll be there in 20 minutes. "Make it 15, please." She hung up before he could respond. Dae-jung grabbed his jacket and keys, ignored Minho's questioning look as he passed through the office, and drove to Oakmont Drive faster than he probably should have. When he knocked on her door, she opened it immediately, as if she'd been waiting right there. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, wearing what looked like old scrubs and a cardigan that had seen better days. "Come in," she said, stepping back. "We're going to have a real conversation. No lies, no pretending, no corporate kidnapper bullshit. Just two people trying to figure out how to survive a situation neither of us wanted." He stepped into her apartment for the first time. It was small but warm, decorated in comfortable chaos. Books piled on surfaces, photos covering the walls, a throw blanket tossed over the couch. It was lived in, personal. It was her. And somehow, standing in the middle of her space, Kim Dae-jung realized that keeping Zara Thompson in his life, even under these twisted circumstances, was going to be far more complicated than he'd ever imagined. They sat across from each other at her small dining table, 2 coffee mugs between them like a neutral zone. She'd made tea, Earl Grey, strong enough to strip paint, and he'd accepted the cup without comment, recognizing the gesture for what it was, an attempt to establish some normalcy, some civility in an inherently uncivilized situation. "I can't do this," she said without preamble. "Not like this. I thought I could. I thought if I just kept my head down and went through the motions, Eventually, it would feel less suffocating. But it doesn't. It gets worse every day. I feel like I'm drowning slowly, and your watcher outside is just making sure I don't swim to shore. Daejung sipped his tea, giving himself time to think. Park isn't there to intimidate you. He's there to protect you. From what? From running to the police? From living my life? Because that's what it feels like. From my enemies, he said quietly. The moment we bound your life to mine, you became a potential target. Anyone who wants to hurt me, to weaken my organization, now sees you as a tool they can use. Park isn't your jailer, Zara. He's your bodyguard. She blinked, clearly not having considered that angle. I'm not important enough to be a target. You are to me, and that makes you important to anyone who opposes me. The words hung between them, heavier than he'd intended. She stared at him, something shifting in her expression. Not softening exactly, but complicating, like she was seeing a different facet of the situation she hadn't recognized before. That's why you gave me the phone, she said slowly. Not just so you could monitor me, but because you're actually worried about my safety. Yes, that's... She shook her head. That's so messed up. You kidnapped me. You ruined my life. And now you're protecting me from problems that only exist because of what you did to me. I'm aware of the irony. Are you? Her voice rose slightly. Are you really? Because from where I'm sitting, you're a criminal who made a mistake and is now trying to manage that mistake without actually fixing anything. You want me to be grateful that you haven't killed me, that you're protecting me, that you're giving me back pieces of my life as if they're gifts instead of things you stole from me in the first place. He set down his tea carefully. You're right. That stopped her. What? You're right. All of it. I can't fix what I did to you. I can't give you back the innocence you had before that night. I can only try to minimize the damage and keep you safe within the constraints of a situation I created. It's not fair. It's not just, but it's reality. She was silent for a long moment, her hands wrapped around her own mug, steam rising between them. I need more, she said finally. If I'm going to survive this with my sanity intact, I need this to be more than just surveillance and silence. I need, I don't know, something that makes me feel less like a prisoner and more like a person. What would that look like? I don't know yet, but maybe... She hesitated, searching for words. Maybe it starts with you treating me like I'm actually under your protection instead of just your thumb. Like I'm someone you're responsible for, not someone you're afraid of. I'm not afraid of you. Yes, you are. You're afraid I'll talk. You're afraid I'll break the arrangement and bring your whole world down. Every time your watchdog reports to you that I went to the grocery store or visited my mother, you're probably checking to see if I had any suspicious conversations, made any unusual calls. You don't trust me, and I don't trust you. And if we're going to live in each other's orbits for however long this lasts, that has to change. She was right, he realized, again. This woman had a way of cutting through his carefully constructed rationalizations and exposing the truth underneath. It was disconcerting. It was also refreshing. Okay, he said. So how do we build trust when the foundation of our relationship is coercion? I don't know. Maybe we start by being honest with each other. Maybe instead of you getting reports about me from your spy, you actually talk to me. Ask me how I'm doing. Let me ask you things. Maybe we stop pretending this is just business and admit that you've fundamentally altered my life. And if I'm stuck with you in it, then you're stuck with me too. You want us to be, what, friends? God, no. The vehemence in her voice was almost funny. I still hate you, but maybe we could be something less antagonistic than captor and captive. Maybe we could find some middle ground where I'm not constantly terrified and you're not constantly paranoid. He considered this. It went against every instinct he had, every rule about maintaining distance, about not getting personally involved in operational matters. But she wasn't wrong. The current arrangement was unsustainable. Either they found a way to make it more bearable, or eventually one of them would break, and the consequences would be catastrophic. All right, he said slowly. We try something different. Park will remain as your protection. That's non-negotiable. But I'll tell him to be less obvious, to give you more space. And I'll check in with you directly instead of relying entirely on his reports. Once a week, we meet, talk. You tell me what you need, what's not working. I tell you anything you need to know about potential threats or changes that might affect you. Once a week? She looked skeptical. That's it? To start. If it helps, we can adjust. The point is creating communication instead of surveillance. She nodded slowly. And I need one more thing. What? I need to know about you. Not business details, not incriminating information I could use against you, but who you are. Because right now, you're just the man who kidnapped me. You're a monster in a nice suit. And I can't. I can't exist in this arrangement if that's all you ever are to me. I need to know you're human, even if you're a terrible human. The request caught him off guard. No one had asked him to be human in a very long time. His world required him to be a force, an authority, a calculation made flesh. Being human, being vulnerable, personal, real was dangerous. But looking at her across the table, at this woman he'd inadvertently made responsible for, he realized she was offering him something he hadn't expected, a chance to be seen as more than his reputation. And maybe, just maybe, that was what they both needed. Ask me something, he said. Something you want to know. She thought for a moment. Why organized crime? What makes someone choose this life? I didn't choose it. I was born into it. My father was Tumak of the Chil Sung Pa before me. I grew up in this world. By the time I was old enough to imagine other options, I was already too deep in to leave. So I decided if I was going to do this, I'd do it with honor, with rules. I'd be better than the men I saw around me growing up, the ones who hurt innocents, who had no code, who were just animals with power. And yet you kidnapped me. And yet I kidnapped you, he agreed. Or my people did, on my orders. So perhaps I'm not as different from those men as I'd like to believe. Perhaps honor is just a story we tell ourselves to justify the things we do. She studied him, and he had the uncomfortable sensation of being examined, assessed, seen. You're not the man I expected you to be, she said finally. What did you expect? Someone crueler, someone who enjoyed the power. But you seem sad. Like you're trapped in your life as much as I'm trapped in mine. The observation hit closer to home than he wanted to admit. We should establish ground rules for these meetings, he said, deflecting. Things we can talk about. Things that are off limits. Okay, I don't want to know details about crimes you've committed or plan to commit. But everything else, your past, your beliefs, how you think, that's fair game. Deal? Deal. And in return, I get to ask you questions too. About your life, your family, your work. If we're building trust, it has to go both ways. She nodded. Fair enough. So, next week, same time? Yes, and Zara? He stood, preparing to leave. Thank you for trying to make this work instead of just giving up. I know that would be easier. Easier? She laughed, but it was bitter. Nothing about this is easy, but I'm a nurse. We're trained to solve problems, to find solutions in impossible situations. This is just the most impossible situation I've ever been in. So we solve it. Or we try to anyway. He left her apartment with a strange feeling in his chest. Not quite guilt, not quite relief, but something in between. Something that felt dangerously close to hope. And as he drove away, Park falling in behind him to report on the meeting, Dae-jung realized that Zara Thompson had just done something no one else in his life had managed. She'd negotiated with him, not through threats or violence or power plays, but through simple, direct honesty about what she needed to survive. He respected that more than he wanted to admit. Their weekly meetings became a strange constant in both their lives. Sometimes they met at her apartment, sometimes at a quiet restaurant Dae-jung chose. Always somewhere neutral, always somewhere Park could watch discreetly but give them space. They talked about surprisingly mundane things at first. Her work at the hospital, his legitimate business fronts, her mother's health, his thoughts on the city's changing neighborhoods. Carefully avoiding anything that could be used as ammunition, but slowly, incrementally, learning who the other person was beyond their circumstances. Zara discovered that he loved old films, the kind with black and white cinematography and dialogue that crackled with wit. That he'd wanted to be an architect when he was young, before his father's death forced him into the organization. That he had a younger sister in California who didn't know anything about his real life, who thought he was just a successful businessman, and he worked hard to keep it that way. He learned that she'd almost gone to medical school but couldn't afford it. That nursing was her compromise, and she'd learned to love it for its own sake. that her father had died when she was 16 and she'd helped raise her brother while her mother worked double shifts to keep them afloat, that she had a wicked sense of humor buried under the trauma and fear. And when it emerged, usually in sarcastic comments about his totally normal and not at all controlling lifestyle, it surprised them both. Park noticed the change before anyone else did. The way his Tumok looked forward to these meetings, the way he'd check his watch on Thursday evenings and make sure nothing would interfere. The way Zara stopped looking quite so haunted, started laughing occasionally when they thought Park couldn't hear. It worried him. Getting emotionally involved with a liability, and that's what she was, no matter what title they gave her, was dangerous. But Park was loyal, and he kept his concerns to himself, reporting only what was necessary to Miho. For Zara, the meetings were a lifeline she hadn't known she needed. Yes, Daijung was still her kidnapper, still the reason her life had been turned upside down. But he was also becoming something else. Someone who listened when she talked about the exhaustion of nursing during flu season, who asked intelligent questions about hospital protocols, who seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts on everything from politics to terrible reality TV. It was confusing, infuriating, and increasingly complicated. One evening, about 2 months into their arrangement, she asked the question that had been building. Do you regret it? Not the kidnapping. I know you'd do that again if you thought it would protect your organization. But do you regret that it was me? That you grabbed the wrong woman and now we're both stuck in this weird situation? They were at a Korean restaurant he'd chosen, one that served incredible kimchi jjigae and had a private room in the back. He'd been teaching her to use chopsticks properly, she kept dropping rice, and it amused him more than he wanted to admit. He considered the question seriously before answering. Yes and no. I regret the pain it's caused you. I regret that you lost the innocence and safety you had before. But... He paused, searching for the right words. I don't regret meeting you. Is that terrible? Yes. But her voice was soft, not accusatory. It's terrible because I understand what you mean. Their eyes met across the table, and something passed between them. Recognition, maybe. An acknowledgement of the impossible thing that was growing in the space created by their forced proximity. This is so messed up, she said, but she didn't look away. Yes. I should hate you more than I do. Probably. I should be planning to betray you, to escape, to go to the FBI and tell them everything. Are you? He asked quietly. No, and I don't know if that makes me smart or Stockholm Syndrome or just so tired of being afraid that I've given up. Maybe all three. For what it's worth, he said, I've never asked you to stop hating me. I've never asked you to forgive what I did. I know I don't deserve either of those things. You don't. She picked up her tea, her hands steady for the first time in months. But you're right about one thing. This situation is forcing us both to survive. And somehow we're managing to do it without destroying each other. That's something, I guess. It's more than I hoped for. The admission hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Outside their private room, the restaurant continued its ordinary evening. Families eating, couples laughing, life going on in all its mundane glory. But inside this space, something fundamental had shifted. Zara Thompson and Kim Dae-jung were no longer just captor and captive. They were becoming something else, something without a name, something that would complicate everything that came after. And in the weeks that followed, as summer turned to fall and fall toward winter, that shift continued. Slowly, carefully, two people who should have remained enemies began to build something that looked dangerously close to trust. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be simple. And it certainly wouldn't be what either of them had planned. But it would be real. And in their world, his world of shadows and hers of healing, reality was the rarest and most precious thing they could offer each other. It happened on a Thursday night in early October. Zara was working late, covering a shift for a colleague whose daughter was sick. The ER had been chaos. A multi-car pileup on I-85 had brought in 6 critical patients, and they'd been operating at full capacity for hours. By the time she finally clocked out at midnight, she was exhausted down to her bones. Park was waiting, as always, in the hospital parking garage. She gave him a tired wave as she headed toward her own car. They'd developed a system where he followed at a discreet distance, close enough to intervene if needed, but far enough to maintain the illusion of her independence. She didn't see the second car until it was too late. It pulled up beside her as she was unlocking her door, blocking her in. 2 men got out. Not Korean, she noticed in that suspended moment of realization. Russian maybe, Eastern European accents. And they were moving toward her with purpose. Zara Thompson? One asked almost politely. She didn't answer, already reaching for the phone in her pocket. Not her regular phone, the special one. But the man was faster, grabbing her wrist. Come with us, don't make scene. Like hell, she said, and did something she'd learned in a self-defense class years ago. She went for his eyes. He jerked back, cursing, and his partner lunged for her. She dodged, screaming now, hoping someone, anyone, would hear. Her hand found her keys, the pepper spray keychain she'd attached after the mugging. She sprayed blindly, heard satisfying sounds of pain. Then Park was there, moving like violence in motion. He hit the first man so hard the crack of bone echoed off concrete. The second man pulled a knife, but Park disarmed him with brutal efficiency, breaking his arm in the process. It was over in seconds. Both men were on the ground, one unconscious, the other whimpering. Park stood over them, breathing hard, his usual calm professionalism replaced by something far more dangerous. Are you hurt? He asked, checking her over with quick professional movements. No, I'm okay. Who are they? What did they want? Get in my car. Now. His voice had gone cold, commanding. This was Park the soldier, Park the enforcer, not the quiet shadow she'd grown used to. She didn't argue. He made a quick call, in Korean, speaking too fast for her to follow, then got behind the wheel and drove. Not to her apartment, not to the hospital, to a building in Midtown she'd never seen before, one that looked like upscale offices but had the kind of security that suggested something else entirely. He led her inside, through a lobby and into an elevator that required a key card. They went up, and up, to the top floor. To Daejung. He was waiting when the elevator doors opened, his face a mask of controlled fury. He looked at her first, checking her for injuries, she realized, then at Park. Report. 2 men, Russians, based on accent and tattoos. They knew her name, knew her car, knew she'd be leaving the hospital at that time. This wasn't random. This was targeted. Something flickered across Daejung's face, a moment of pure, cold rage that was somehow more frightening than any overt display of anger. Then it was gone, locked behind his usual control. Zara, are you hurt? He asked, his voice gentler than his expression. No, shaken, but not hurt. Park got there before they could. Whatever they were planning. She wrapped her arms around herself, the adrenaline crash beginning to hit. Who were they? What did they want? You, specifically. He guided her to a leather couch in what was clearly his office. Larger than her apartment, floor-to-ceiling windows showing Atlanta's nighttime skyline. Everything screaming power and money. Sit, I'll get you something. He returned with water and what looked like whiskey. She took the whiskey. I don't understand, she said. I'm nobody. Why would anyone? You're not nobody. Not anymore. You're connected to me. And someone just tried to use that connection against me. The full meaning of his words sank in slowly. The Russians. You have enemies. Many enemies. But the Russians in particular have been trying to move into territory we control. I've blocked them. And now they've decided to escalate. By coming after me. Yes. She drank the whiskey in one burning gulp. You said I'd be safe. You promised protection. And you are safe. Park did his job. You're here, unharmed. But his jaw was tight, his hands clenched. But they shouldn't have gotten that close. They shouldn't have known about you at all. Someone talked. Someone in my organization gave them information. A mole. A traitor. The word was laden with implications she didn't want to think about. Someone who will be found and dealt with. Park's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then at his boss. Miho says the men are awake, ready for questioning. Go, get everything. Names, who sent them, how they learned about her, everything. Park left, and suddenly Zara was alone with Daejung in his private space, in the middle of the night, still shaking from the realization that she'd almost been kidnapped again. This time by people who might not have had his rules about not hurting innocents. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Which time? For kidnapping me in the first place, or for not keeping me safe from the consequences of that kidnapping? Both. All of it. He ran a hand through his hair, that gesture of frustration she'd come to recognize. This is why I wanted you protected. This is why Park follows you. Because I knew that the moment my enemies discovered you existed, you'd become a target. I just didn't expect them to move this quickly. What happens now? Now? His expression hardened. Now I send a message. A very clear message about what happens when someone targets what's mine. The possessiveness in his voice should have alarmed her. Should have made her pull back. Remind him that she wasn't his, that she'd never chosen any of this. But instead, she felt something else. Something that shamed her even as she acknowledged it. She felt safe. Because whatever else Daijung was, whatever darkness lived in him, he meant what he said. She was under his protection, and he would burn down the world before he let that protection fail. I should go home, she said, though the thought of her apartment, her normal, ordinary, now violated apartment, made her feel cold. Not tonight. It's not secure. They knew your schedule, which means they might know your address too. You'll stay here until we've neutralized the threat. Here, in your office? I have an apartment on the floor below. Guest room, fully stocked. You'll be safe there, and I'll be right upstairs if you need anything. She should argue, should insist on her independence, on her right to return to her own life. But the truth was, she was terrified. Those men had known her name, had been waiting for her, and if Park hadn't been there, okay, she said quietly, just for tonight. Just for tonight, he agreed, though they both knew it was a lie. She didn't sleep. How could she, in a strange place, knowing that somewhere in the building below, men were being questioned about an attempted kidnapping? Her attempted kidnapping. The apartment was beautiful, impersonal in that way of space is meant for temporary occupation. But it felt secure in a way her own home no longer did. Around 3 a.m., she gave up on sleep and ventured upstairs. She found Daijung still in his office, standing at the windows, the city spread out below him like a kingdom he ruled. Can't sleep either? She asked from the doorway. He turned, surprise flickering across his face. You should rest. Should and can are different things. She came into the room, joining him at the window. Have you heard anything? Yes, they were sent by Alexei Volkov, Russian vor trying to establish operations here. He learned about you from someone I trusted, someone who's been dealt with. Dealt with, she repeated, not wanting to know the details but understanding the implications. And Volkov? Will receive a message he can't ignore. No one threatens my people without consequences. I'm not your people. I'm your prisoner, remember? He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. You stopped being just a prisoner months ago, Zara. We both know that. Then what am I? I don't know. The admission seemed to cost him. But you're mine to protect. That's not negotiable. That's not something I'm willing to compromise on, even if you hate me for it. I don't hate you. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Not anymore. I should. God, I should. But I don't. And I don't know what's wrong with me that I don't. The space between them felt charged, electric. They were standing too close, the city lights behind them, the rest of the world very far away. Nothing's wrong with you, he said quietly. You're surviving. That's all either of us is doing. Is that what this is? Survival? What else would it be? She didn't have an answer. Or rather, she did, but saying it out loud would make it real in a way she wasn't ready for. So instead, she said, I'm scared. I know. Not just of Volkov or the Russians or whoever else wants to use me against you. I'm scared of this. Of whatever this is becoming between us. Because it doesn't make sense. It can't work. You're a criminal and I'm a good person who got dragged into a bad situation? No, I was going to say I'm a person who's starting to see you as something other than the monster who ruined my life. And that terrifies me more than any kidnapping attempt. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, it terrifies me too. The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Outside, Atlanta glittered, oblivious to the impossible thing taking shape in this office, between these two people who should never have met, who should never have mattered to each other. I should go back downstairs, she said, not moving. Yes. This is a mistake. Yes. We shouldn't. He kissed her. It was gentle at first, almost questioning, giving her every chance to pull away. But she didn't. Instead, she leaned in, her hands finding his shoulders, and kissed him back with all the confusion and fear and impossible, inexplicable feeling that had been building for months. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she whispered, This doesn't change anything. I know. I still didn't choose this, any of this. I know. And if this goes badly, if I end up hurt, I won't let that happen. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch impossibly gentle for a man capable of such violence. Whatever else I am, whatever darkness lives in me, I will keep you safe. That's not a threat or a promise. It's a fact. You're mine now, and I protect what's mine. She should be afraid of that possessiveness, that certainty. But instead, she felt something else. Something like coming home to a place she'd never known existed. "What are we doing?" she asked. "Something incredibly stupid. Glad we're on the same page." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his usually stern face into something almost boyish. "Go to bed, Zara. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." She nodded and left, but at the door she turned back. "Thank you for saving me, again, even though you're the reason I needed saving in the first place. That irony isn't lost on me." "Good. I'd hate for you to get comfortable with any of this." She went back to the guest apartment, and this time, she slept. Not well, not peacefully, but she slept. Because despite everything, despite all logic and self-preservation, she trusted him. And that was going to complicate everything. The message Dae-jung sent to Alexei Volkov was delivered in the way such messages are delivered in their world. Through action, not words. 3 of Volkov's operations were shut down in a single night. Money was seized, assets frozen, key players arrested on charges that would somehow stick despite the usual corruption. The Russians got the message. Zara Thompson was off limits. Untouchable, protected by a force they couldn't match. But messages like that come with costs. The fragile détente between the Korean and Russian organizations shattered. What had been Cold War became hot. Not the kind that made headlines. No bodies left in streets, no public violence. But anyone paying attention could see the shift. Territories changed hands overnight. Money moved through unexpected channels. People disappeared, quietly and permanently. And through it all, Zara found herself deeper and deeper in Dae-jung's world. She moved into the apartment below his office, at least temporarily. "Too dangerous to return home yet," he said. Maybe true, maybe just an excuse. She wasn't sure which, and increasingly, she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Her mother called daily, worried about her, extending her stay with a friend while her apartment was being repaired after a break-in. Another lie, added to the growing pile. Her brother was suspicious. She could hear it in his voice during their calls. But what could she tell him? That she was living in a luxury apartment owned by a Korean crime lord who'd kidnapped her 5 months ago, and who she was now. What? Dating? That wasn't the right word. Involved with? That wasn't right either. There wasn't a word for what they were. She still went to work. Park still followed. Now with additional backup, she pretended not to notice. She saved lives, she came home to the apartment that wasn't hers, and she had dinner with a man who both terrified and captivated her. One evening, about 3 weeks after the attack, she found him in his office, staring at screens full of data she couldn't interpret. He looked exhausted, the kind of bone-deep tired that came from too many decisions with too much weight. "Come to bed," she said from the doorway. He looked up, surprise and something else. Warmth, maybe, flickering across his face. "It's only 10. And you've been up since 5 this morning? I counted. Come on, the war with the Russians will still be there tomorrow." "That's what concerns me." She crossed to him, took his hand. When had that become natural, touching him like this? And pulled him to his feet. 5 hours. Give yourself 5 hours to be human instead of a tumok. Then you can go back to being terrifying and in charge. He allowed himself to be led downstairs, to the apartment they'd somehow started sharing without ever explicitly deciding to share it, to the bedroom that had become theirs. They didn't talk about it, didn't analyze what it meant that she slept in his arms now, that she'd memorized the rhythm of his breathing, that his presence had become the thing that made her feel safe in a world that no longer felt safe at all. Instead, they existed in this strange limbo, not quite together, not quite separate, bound by circumstances that had nothing to do with choice and everything to do with survival. But survival, it turned out, could look surprisingly like love when you weren't paying attention. The war with the Russians ended not with violence, but with negotiation. A summit arranged by intermediaries, held in neutral territory, attended by the heads of every major organization in the Southeast. It was a peace conference for criminals, and Dae-jung attended with all the gravity of a diplomat at a world summit. Zara watched him leave, wearing his armor of expensive suit and cold authority, and understood that this was who he really was in his world. not the man who held her at night, who laughed at her terrible jokes, who argued with her about movies and politics, but the Tumak, the boss, the force that bent circumstances to his will. He returned 3 days later, exhausted but vindicated. The Russians had agreed to terms, backed down from their expansion, acknowledged the Chilsungpa's territory, paid restitution for their attempted move on Kim's woman, as they'd apparently called her. Kim's woman, she repeated when he told her. That's what I am? To them, yes. To the world, you're untouchable because you're mine. Is that such a terrible thing? I don't know, is it? He pulled her close, and she went willingly, her head against his chest, his heartbeat steady under her ear. I can't give you back your old life, Zara, but I can give you this one. Different, complicated, but yours. Safe, protected, and if you want, loved. The last word was quiet, almost afraid. She looked up at him. Say that again. Which part? The last part? The scared part. I love you. Still quiet, but firm. I didn't mean to. I fought it. But somewhere between trying to manage a crisis and trying to keep you from hating me, I fell in love with you. And if that's something you can't accept, I understand. God knows you have every reason. She kissed him, cutting off the words, because maybe she couldn't say it yet. Maybe the words were still too complicated, too twisted up and everything else. But she could show him, could kiss him like he was her choice, not her captor. Her future, not her prison. When they broke apart, he looked at her with such hope and fear mixed together that it broke something in her chest. I don't know if what I feel is love, she said honestly. I don't know if I can love someone who did what you did to me, but I know I don't want to leave. I know that when I imagine my life, you're in it now. And maybe that's close enough to love for now. Maybe it's enough. It's enough, he said. It's more than I deserve. Yes, it is, and you're going to spend the rest of your life proving you deserve it, understand? Understood. And somehow, impossibly, they made it work. She kept her job at the hospital, moved her things into the apartment below his office, making it theirs. Had difficult conversations with her family about her new relationship with a businessman named Kim Dae-jung, who they would slowly get to know, never understanding the full truth of what he was. Park became her friend as well as her guardian. Miho grudgingly accepted her presence. The organization adapted, as organizations do, to this new reality. Their Tumok had found someone, and she was now part of the family. Protected, honored, off limits to anyone with sense. And Zara adapted too, to a life that included both saving lives at Grady and attending charity galas where half the attendees were criminals in expensive suits. To loving a man who made his living breaking laws she'd been raised to respect. To being both herself and Kim's woman, the nurse and the Tumok's love. It wasn't the life she'd planned. It wasn't the life she would have chosen, given any other option. But it was hers. And in the end, maybe that was enough. Zara stood in front of the mirror in what she still sometimes thought of as his apartment, but had long since become their home. She adjusted the simple gold necklace, a gift from her mother who'd slowly warmed to Dae-jung, won over by his quiet respect for her daughter and his generous support of her medical expenses. Ready? Dae-jung's voice came from behind her. She turned to find him in a perfect suit. He always wore suits for these events, looking every inch the successful businessman most people thought he was. As I'll ever be. The charity gala was one they attended annually now, a fundraiser for hospital equipment and emergency services. Every year, she saw doctors and nurses she knew mixing with people from Dae-jung's world, all pretending they didn't recognize each other's true nature. It was a dance, a performance, and she'd gotten surprisingly good at it. You know, she said as they headed to the car, 2 years ago, if someone had told me I'd be going to galas on the arm of a crime boss, I'd have thought they were crazy. And now? Now I think they'd still be crazy, but also not entirely wrong. He smiled, that real smile she'd learned to coax out of him, the one that softened his face and reminded her he was human under all that control. For what it's worth, if someone had told me I'd fall in love with the woman I accidentally kidnapped, I would have had them committed. Good thing we're both crazy then. Good thing. At the gala, she worked the room with practiced ease, chatting with colleagues about their cases, listening to wealthy donors make promises about their support. And when she looked across the room and saw Dae-jung in conversation with a hospital administrator, probably arranging some generous anonymous donation, she felt something warm and complicated in her chest. Not quite forgiveness for that original sin. She wasn't sure she'd ever fully forgive him for stealing her choice, her innocence, her old life. But something else. Acceptance, maybe. Recognition that sometimes terrible things lead to unexpected places, and those places can become home if you let them. Later, as they drove through Atlanta's nighttime streets, she said, "Do you ever regret it? Not us, but how we started." He was quiet for a moment. "Every day. I regret taking your choice, your safety, your innocence, but I can't regret what we became. Does that make me a terrible person?" "Yes, but I already knew that." "And you love me anyway?" She reached across the car, taking his hand. "I love you anyway, which probably makes me equally terrible. We're a matched set then. The worst kind of love story. But ours." And as they pulled into the parking garage of the building that housed both his office and their home, Zara thought about the girl she'd been 2 years ago. The tired nurse who just wanted to go home, who'd had no idea her life was about to be turned completely upside down. That girl was gone, transformed by trauma and time and a love that made no sense but existed anyway. In her place was this woman, stronger, more complicated, living a life that straddled two worlds. Not quite innocent, not quite criminal, not quite free, not quite captive, but alive, protected, loved in a way that was as fierce as it was flawed. And maybe, just maybe, that was worth the price she'd paid to get here. If you enjoyed this story of forbidden love, twisted fate, and unlikely connections, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. Drop a comment telling us what you thought. Was Zara's choice understandable or unforgivable? Could you ever love your kidnapper? We read every comment and love hearing your thoughts. Hit that notification bell so you never miss another story from the dark and dangerous world of organized crime and the hearts it unexpectedly captures. Next time, we'll bring you another tale from the shadows, where love blooms in the most impossible places and wrong turns sometimes lead to exactly where you needed to be. Until then, remember, sometimes the wrong address leads to the right person, even if the journey to get there is anything but right.